Hello again, welcome back to Discovering the Real God, the final part of what makes God listen to us, what makes God answer prayer. Really, I just want to get straight into things, and we were kind of going towards this, I believe, in the study, looking at how we live our lives before God. That God notices everything, God notices how we live, He notices how we treat other people. He notices particularly, married men, how we treat our wives. And it says He won't listen. If you mistreat your wife, God will not hear your prayers. Now, if you want God to hear your prayers, then surely there should be some effort there to treat your wife with some respect and in humility. Surely. If you say you're a man of God and you want to move on, surely that there should be some attempt at humility. It's not easy. I'm no different from any other person. I'm no different from any other man. I'm proud, and I'm selfish. I'm self-centered. I'm no different from anybody else who's struggles to get rid of this vile, abominous thing called pride. It's absolutely hideous. It's horrible. And we just have to, keep working at it. We have to allow God in. We'll have to allow God to change our heart. We have to keep short accounts with God. We have to keep going back to God day after day after day. As I say, I reflect on my day. I reflect on conversations I've had with people. I reflect on the way I've dealt with situations. I even reflect on the way that I drive the car some days, thinking, oh, maybe I could have given way there and I missed the opportunity. It sounds silly, but it's not, because God cares about all of these things. He cares about the tiniest thing. Everything God cares about, absolutely everything. He sees everything, He knows everything, He cares about everything. And He will leave you if you are not wanting to walk in His way. He just leaves you and says, okay, you just go your way for a while. I'm telling you, that's what He does. And that's exactly what He does do. Because He will not tolerate pride. He only takes notice of us when we humble ourselves. Tells us how He'll heal the land. It's not by being proud, is it? If my people who are called by my name, etc., etc. We're not talking about that today, but it's there in black and white. He's not changed. He still wants the same from us. Now, our daily lives, it says pray without ceasing. Now, I've heard different views on this, and a lot of them are valid, and my take on it is it's your heart. It's I think it was Brother Lawrence, practicing the presence of God. Carrying God in your heart all day long. You can't go into the shop and ask for a bottle of milk, and you can't be muttering away out to the God and blah, 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 blah. A bottle of milk, please. Blah, 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 blah. Oh, thanks very much. We know it's not like that. Pray without ceasing. We know that. It's carrying God in your heart. Being aware of your behaviour to others. Being aware. I don't like this what would Jesus do thing. I think it's a bit silly myself. What would Jesus do? Well, you don't know what He would do. What would Jesus do? What are you going to do? That's what matters to God. It's not what would Jesus do and you try and copy what Jesus would do. What are you going to do that matters to God? What are you going to do? What's in your heart? How are you going to address the situation? How are you going to treat people? How are you going to address situations that you find yourself in? What are you going to be like when somebody is on the road and has got a bit of road rage and shouting at you and all the things, how are you going to behave then? How are you going to behave when you're in a tight corner? How are you going to behave like when I was at the other side of the world and got robbed of all the money I had, and I was left in that situation? How am I going to be? How are you going to be? How are you going to address the situation? I remember when I went with Maurice Barrett all the way to Sierra Leone, and we got there and they wouldn't let us in. We'd got our visas. We didn't need a visa, that was it. English people don't need visas, that was it. But we were there, and they weren't going to let us in because we didn't have yellow fever certificates. I mean, what was we going to do? We looked very much like they were going to put us back on the plane and send us home again. And we said, okay, if that's what God decrees and declares over this situation, then we shall go back. All that money on airfares and everybody waiting to hear Maurice speak, not just in the place where we'd landed, but at the other side of the country where we'd got to travel. All those people. But we just said okay. And miraculously, I can't go into it, but it was a miraculous thing. They were all arguing, and we just arguing with one another over us, and us standing in the middle, all of these officials, and we just walked through the crowd out of the airport and into the mission that Maurice was there for. How are you going to be when these things come up? It's not about what would Jesus do. I think it's, as I say, that's only my opinion. You might think it's a great thing to think. I don't, because it's not about Jesus. In that sense, it's about me. How am I going to be before Jesus? How am I going to be representing him? Me. How am I going to humble myself so that Jesus can say to the Father, look at this. And the Father can say to Jesus, behold your bride. That's what it's about. Surely, how we are. Sorry, I've got carried away there. But pray without ceasing. That's in Thessalonians. It's about what's in your heart, because it says in Philippians here, rejoice in the Lord always. And again I say rejoice. Let your moderation be known to all men. The Lord is at hand. Be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which passes all understanding, shall keep your heart and your mind through Christ Jesus. So, there, we're not to be mindful of anything. We're not to worry. We're not to fret. That's another thing. That's sin. I think I've talked about that before. That's sin. You have to declare that to God. You have to admit your sin and repent, even if it's 10 times a day. If you feel yourself being anxious, go to God with it. Give it to God. Say you're sorry and carry on. Keep asking God. I've been in that situation and I know what it's like. I was a very, very anxious person. And I was working in the community. And it was a very, very anxious time for me. And every day I was asking God to deal with situations for me. Not to take them away, but to do it in his way. And sometimes he did take them away. Sometimes he sent someone else to do it for me, to represent me. And I would be standing there and they would be my mouthpiece. Amazing things happened. But I was repenting. I was sorry. I didn't want to be anxious. And I don't want to be anxious ever again. So these are the things. If you have to walk with God. He understands if you're anxious. You have to keep giving it. It doesn't matter how many times a day. Everything by prayer, request, and supplication with thanksgiving. That's the other thing. God hates moaners. He really does. And I tell you what, we're all guilty. What do? We soon start moaning. It says here, do all things without murmuring and disputing, complaining, that you may be blameless and harmless, the sons of God without rebuke, in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. Now, aren't we in a perverse and crooked generation now? Look at the way things are. People are frightened to death, literally, out there, of this epidemic, this COVID-19 thing. Absolutely frightened to death. And they'd shot their own mother if they thought it was contravening, something to do with the social distancing and all the rest of it. They shot their own mother because they're frightened. It's not because they're bad people in that sense. They're absolutely frightened to death. We're not to be frightened. Certainly not frightened to death. We're to walk in peace. We're to allow God to do all these things before us. Give it to God, everything, all the time. I keep coming back to it. It doesn't matter how many times. God doesn't get fed up of you confessing if you're having a difficulty. But what he doesn't want is you going away and trying to do it yourself. Because you can't. If I'd have been able to deal with my anxiety before I realised that I had to keep taking it to God as sin, I'd have done it. I wouldn't have been anxious at all. But I realised it was sin, and it took me a long time. I mean, it's only been in the last, let me think, 8 years probably, that I realised that it was sin and I had to keep taking it to God, and God's dealt with it. I was frightened to die, but God's dealt with that. And I mean, I'm not worried about that. I mean, it don't make me any less of a Christian. I know that because I know John Wesley, the great John Wesley, the man of God, was frightened to die before God dealt with him. So, I've got something in common with John Wesley, so that's all right, isn't it? So, the other thing, probably we've come to the last part now, I suppose. Are we worshipping other gods? You'll say no. You'll say no. Well, let's think about it. Let's consider it. I mean, back in the day, there were other nations that infiltrated the ranks of the Israelites. And they went astray with other gods. It was quite obvious what they were doing. I mean, they even passed the children through the fire to Molech. Terrible things they did. But as I said earlier, when Jesus came, he had a lot to say about how religious Pharisees had become hard-hearted towards God and neglected the things of God, separating them from the people. I also mentioned the church today. One half consider themselves to be the official church, the Orthodox, genuine church, while the others in the so-called free church condemn the official church for being religious because of the wearing of regalia. Yet they are similarly religious, but without the obvious trappings. It's even worse, really, because it's in the heart. Both parties are pretty irrelevant when you think about it to the world, because where did anybody run to the church when COVID-19 struck? No, the church closed the doors. They were as frightened as anyone else. That's the way we've got to. I'm not knocking anybody. That's a fact of life. That's where we got to. That people were afraid. The church were afraid. Dear me, that's where we've come to. This is why we've got to start making a paradigm shift back to God. Otherwise, what's going to happen? Because Jesus is coming soon. Where are you going to be? Will I find faith? He says. I mean, look at the trappings of today's society. There was nothing in those days. I mean, there was no television or anything like that. There was nothing to draw you aside except watching other people worshipping other gods. And really, they should have cottoned onto that, but they didn't. And we don't. We're no different. I mean, look at sport. Participating or spectating sport that consumes people's time. It consumes them as a passion that people can't wait. Don't tell me what the score is. I'm going to watch this football match. I'm going to watch the rugby. Don't tell me what the score is. For goodness sake, these are people of God. All of their energy is soaked up with the world. That's the world. Don't love the world. God tells us not to love the world. Television. Watching murder, rape, criminal activities, sexual immorality, lying, cheating. Do you know, I was terrible as a Christian. I can all the murder mysteries, Sherlock Holmes and Miss Marples and Endeavour and Morse and I absolutely loved them. Do you know, God showed me I had to stop watching all of that stuff, and it nearly killed me because I loved it. My heart yearned for it, and I saw that there was another series of Endeavour, and I thought, but no, because I've chosen God over the entertainment, over watching blood and guts on the television. Politics. People get wound up in politics. Well, I'm interested in things that have happened. I was interested in the Brexit debate and what people were saying. But you've not got to let it consume you. Hobbies. People would rather go fishing. I've talked about sport and football and all the things. People would rather go fishing. They'd rather build the train set than spend time with God. Aren't these gods? Surely they're modern day gods. Alcohol. They'd rather go to the pub. They'd rather do something with the pals and have a beer or two. I'm not talking about against alcohol. I'm not talking about against alcohol at all. Nevertheless, I know myself. I'm not a teetotaler, but I know myself. 1 drink's fine. 2 drinks, well, okay. But you start on the 3rd, and you start losing that inhibition, and you lose that self-governance to stop you having more and more. And your tongue loosens, and you say things and do things that you really wouldn't want to do. Holidays. I just sound like a real killjoy, I know, but people are looking forward to the next holiday rather than the next encounter with God. They can't wait. We're going to Canada next year. We're going to Australia to see my brother, or whatever. Marvellous. But it should not take the place of God. God should be here, carried with you. You should be mindful of God. We should be, not you should be. I have to talk to myself because I'm no different. Really, really. Fashions. People get wound up with fashions. You know, and they want the latest shoes or whatever. suppose that's more of a female-dominated thing, but nevertheless. Possessions. Cars. I've already talked about my motorbike, but it's in the garage, and it comes out, and I enjoy it. But it has a place, but it's not taking the place, and it won't do. Neither will my car. But possessions, they're just things at the end of the day. If you've got something and you can't let it go, then you know that it's got you. If you wouldn't be prepared to give your car away, you know that it's got you. You've not got it. It owns you. You see people with dogs. You see the dogs, the dog allows them to live in its house. It allows them to feed it. It allows them to take it for a walk. I'm talking about Christians. What do you do? The first thing, what's the priority when you wake up? I'm not talking about bodily functions either. I'm talking about what's on your heart. Pray, pick up your Bible, switch on the telly. What do you do mostly? What do you spend more time in? Watching football or soap operas, or spending time with the Lord? You've heard this before, I'm sure. But the trouble is, the people that's preached it aren't the people that's doing it. I know that as I am speaking to you, I have done these things in my life. So that qualifies me to be able to say it. I've got rid of these things. Only recently, some of them. I've struggled. But I want God. I want God to be preeminent in my life. I want to die, but I can't. In that sense. You know, we struggle with pride and all the things I just said, but where your heart is, where your treasure is, what's the most important thing in your life? If you want to hear from God, don't bother watching me, don't bother listening to me. If your priorities are different, if your priorities are outside of God, then don't expect God to speak to you. It's funny actually, because as I was researching this video, a friend posted something on Facebook. It was a quote by A.W. Tozer. I thought it fitted this rather well. A.W. Tozer said, "Most Christians don't hear God's voice because we have already decided we are not going to do what he said." I'll say that again. Most Christians don't hear God's voice because we have already decided that we are not going to do what he said. We've decided in our heart, is what I'm talking about, not with outwardly determined, and that would never do. That would never do, to voice what's in our heart. But I hope that this study has brought some direction. It's spoken to me as I've been doing it, and you know, as I say, I have to keep looking at myself. And if there's anything, things have crept back. Only the other day I was watching something, and it was for the music. I was watching something for the music, because I play the piano, and I was listening to a piece on YouTube for the music. Then I listened to another, and then another, and I thought, hello. You know, you have to be quite strict with yourself. It's a discipline. But, you know, the difference it's made in my life and my walk with God, I cannot describe it. I cannot describe to you the difference it has made to me and my walk with God and my daily life by getting rid of things that are irrelevant, and I haven't missed them. I did it first, but now I don't miss them at all. We think we can't live without them, but you know, God somehow compensates you for all of that, somehow. I'm going on, I'm sorry, but I just want you to know that there is so much more, and I am hungry for God, and I think some people that are watching this video are hungry for God. They're saying, is this all there is? There must be something more than this, and there is. God bless you. We'll see you again next time on Discovering the Real God. Thank you. Bye-bye.